The stage manager looked at Eddie Van Halen's passport and said three words that changed rock history forever. No foreign acts. It was 1979, and Van Halen had just become the biggest rock band in America. But in a Houston venue's backstage corridor, Eddie was about to make a decision that would cost him everything he'd worked for. What happened in the next hour didn't just end a promoter's career. It redefined what it meant to be an immigrant in American rock and roll. Before we dive deeper into this story, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss stories about courage, music, and standing up for what's right. It was March 1979. Van Halen's second album had just gone platinum. Eddie Van Halen, the kid who'd arrived in California from Amsterdam 17 years earlier speaking no English, was now the most talked-about guitarist in the world. Eruption had changed everything. The album Van Halen 2 was climbing the charts. They were scheduled for a massive tour, 70 cities, 200 shows. This was the tour that would make them millionaires, the tour that would cement their legacy. The Houston stop was particularly important. The Summit Arena, capacity 20,000. The promoter, a man named Clayton Burke, had guaranteed them their biggest payday yet, $100,000 for a single night. In 1979, that was generational wealth for a band that had been sleeping in vans just 3 years earlier. Eddie arrived at the venue around 4 in the afternoon for the 8 o'clock show. He came with his brother Alex on drums, Michael Anthony on bass, and David Lee Roth on vocals. They'd driven from Dallas in their new tour bus, still marveling at the luxury of not sleeping on the floor. They were living the American dream. The immigrant kid who'd been bullied for his accent in elementary school was now a rock star. The boy who'd eaten sandwiches from paper bags while other kids mocked his strange Dutch lunches was now signing autographs. Eddie had made it, or so he thought. As they approached the backstage entrance, a security guard stopped them. Eddie was carrying his guitar case, the Frankenstrat that had become his signature. The guard looked at Eddie and Alex, both with their dark hair and foreign features, and something shifted in his expression. He asked to see identification. Eddie pulled out his wallet. He showed his California driver's license. The guard examined it, then asked for something else. "Passport or birth certificate," the guard said. "Why would I need a passport?" Eddie asked, confused. "I live in California. We drove here from Dallas." The guard's face hardened. "New venue policy. All performers need to verify citizenship." David Lee Roth, blonde and blue-eyed and all-American, stepped forward. "This is ridiculous," Roth said. "We're Van Halen. We're on every radio station in America. Let us through." The guard looked at Roth's driver's license and waved him through, immediately. No passport required. No birth certificate demanded. Michael Anthony, also blonde, walked through without question. But Eddie and Alex were still being detained. "I need to see proof of citizenship," the guard repeated, looking only at the Van Halen brothers. But what happened next revealed something Eddie hadn't expected in his adopted country. That's when Clayton Burke appeared. He was a big man in his 50s, wearing a cowboy hat and boots, a Texas oil money millionaire who'd gotten into concert promotion as a vanity project. He'd made his fortune in petroleum, and he ran his venues the way he ran his oil rigs. His way or the highway. "What's the holdup?" Burke asked. The guard explained the situation. Burke looked at Eddie and Alex, his eyes lingering on their features, their accents, everything that marked them as different. "Gentlemen," Burke said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "this is a simple formality. Texas has regulations. We need to verify work, eligibility for all foreign performers." Eddie felt something cold settle in his stomach. Foreign performers? Eddie repeated. I'm an American citizen. I've lived here since I was 7 years old. Burke's smile remained fixed. Well then, showing proof shouldn't be a problem. You do have proof, don't you? Eddie and Alex exchanged glances. They hadn't brought their naturalization papers on tour. Why would they? They'd been American citizens for over a decade. They had social security numbers, paid American taxes, voted in American elections. But in this moment, in this corridor, none of that seemed to matter. I don't carry my naturalization papers with me, Eddie said. Neither does Alex. We can call California and have them faxed, but that'll take hours. We have a show to put on. Burke's expression hardened. No papers, no show. Not for foreign acts. That's the policy. Roth stepped back into the corridor. He'd heard everything. This is insane, Roth said. Eddie and Alex are Americans. They've been Americans longer than they were Dutch. You let me through with just a driver's license. Why are they different? Burke turned to Roth with barely concealed irritation. Mr. Roth, you're clearly American. These two, they've got accents. They've got foreign names. Van Halen isn't exactly Smith or Jones. We have standards to maintain. The racism wasn't even subtle. It hung in the air like smoke. Eddie felt 14 years old again, back in that Pasadena schoolyard, where kids had mocked his accent, where they'd called him strange, where they'd made him feel like he'd never belong no matter how hard he tried. But he wasn't 14 anymore. He was 23, and he was the best guitarist in rock and roll, and he'd spent his entire life proving he belonged. Let me understand this, Eddie said slowly, his Dutch accent becoming slightly more pronounced, as it always did when he was angry. You want me and my brother to prove we're American enough to play in your venue. But Roth and Anthony, they're fine. Just us. Burke shifted his weight. Now don't go making this about race or nationality. It's just policy. If you were born here, you'd have a birth certificate. If you weren't, you need naturalization papers. Simple as that. Except you didn't ask for Roth's birth certificate, Eddie said. You took one look at his license and let him through. Mr. Roth looks American, Burke said. Eddie stared at him. The words hung there, naked and ugly. Looks American. As if being American had a specific appearance. As if Eddie's 17 years of building a life in this country, of learning English, of playing in garage bands and clubs and eventually arenas, of paying taxes and contributing to American culture, meant nothing because he didn't look the right way. Eddie turned to his brother. They spoke in Dutch, rapid fire, a language they only used when they needed privacy. Burke's face reddened. English only, Burke barked. You're in America. Speak American. Eddie ignored him and continued talking to Alex in Dutch. They were discussing their options. They could call their lawyer in California and have the papers faxed. It would take 4 hours minimum. The show would be delayed. They'd lose money. The fans would be angry. Or they could comply with Burke's demands, show their papers like criminals proving their innocence, and swallow the humiliation. Or they could do something else entirely. The decision Eddie made next would destroy a $50 million empire. Eddie switched back to English. Mr. Burke, Eddie said calmly, I'm curious about something. This policy about foreign performers needing extra documentation, when did it start? Burke looked uncomfortable. It's always been the policy. Really? Eddie said. Because we played Austin last week. We played Dallas 2 nights ago. Nobody asked for our naturalization papers. Burke waved his hand dismissively. Different venues, different policies. Eddie nodded, slowly. So this is your policy specifically. Your venue, your rules. That's right, Burke said, seeming to regain confidence. My venue, my rules, and if you want to play here tonight, you'll follow them. Eddie looked at the $20,000 guitar in his case. He thought about the $100,000 they were supposed to make tonight. He thought about his parents, Jan and Eugenia Van Halen, who'd sacrificed everything to bring their family to America in 1962. They'd left behind their entire lives in Amsterdam. His father had been a successful musician in the Netherlands, but in America he'd had to take menial jobs. His mother had cleaned houses. They'd endured poverty and prejudice so their sons could have opportunities they'd never had in post-war Europe. And they'd raised Eddie and Alex to be proud of who they were, to never apologize for their heritage, to never let anyone make them feel less than human because of where they were born. Eddie made his decision. "We're not doing your show," Eddie said. Burke's confident expression cracked. "Excuse me?" "We're not performing tonight," Eddie repeated. "Not under these conditions. Not in a venue that treats American citizens like suspects because of their accents or their last names." Burke's face went from confused to angry in seconds. "You have a contract," Burke said. "You're legally obligated to perform. If you walk away, I'll sue you for breach of contract. I'll take everything you have." "Sue away," Eddie said. "But I'm not playing for someone who treats me and my brother like we're foreigners in our own country." Burke stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Do you have any idea how much money is on the line here? I've invested a fortune in this show. Advertising, production, staffing. We're sold out. 20,000 fans are coming tonight. If you cancel, you'll be ruining 20,000 people's evening. You'll be destroying my reputation. And I will destroy your career. I have connections throughout Texas, throughout the South. You'll never play another show in this region. I'll make sure of it." What Eddie said next became legendary among immigrant musicians across America. Eddie smiled, and it was not a friendly smile. "Mr. Burke, let me tell you something about immigrants. We don't come to this country because it's easy. We come because we believe in an idea. We believe that in America, it doesn't matter where you're born. It doesn't matter what your name is or what accent you have. It matters what you contribute, what you create, what you give to this country." Eddie's voice was quiet, but every word carried weight. "My father was a professional musician in Europe. He came to America and had to wash dishes because his credentials meant nothing here. My mother cleaned toilets in houses where people wouldn't let her use the front door. My brother and I got bullied in school because we didn't speak English. Kids threw food at us, called us names, made us feel like we'd never belong." Burke shifted uncomfortably, but Eddie wasn't finished. "But we kept going. We practiced guitar until our fingers bled. We played every dive bar that would have us. We slept in vans. We ate nothing but cereal for weeks at a time. We did all of that because we believed that in America, talent matters more than where you're from. And now we've made it. We're successful. We're American success stories. The immigrant dream realized." Eddie paused. "And you want me to carry papers to prove I'm American enough to play music in your venue? You want me to jump through hoops that you don't require from my bandmates because they look more American than I do? You want me to be grateful for the opportunity to humiliate myself?" Eddie picked up his guitar case. "I'd rather be broke." Burke's face had gone from angry to desperate. "Wait, just wait. Let's talk about this. Maybe we can find a compromise." "What compromise?" Eddie asked. "You either treat all 4 members of this band the same way, or you don't." There's no middle ground when it comes to basic human dignity. Burke was sweating now. Look, I didn't mean anything by it. It's just policy. Just bureaucracy. I'm not a racist or a xenophobe. I'm just following procedures. Whose procedures? Eddie asked. What law requires naturalization papers for American citizens who want to play music? Show me the law, Mr. Burke. Show me the Texas statute that says I need to prove my citizenship to you when my blonde bandmates don't. Burke couldn't answer, because there was no such law. This was his policy, born from his prejudices, wrapped in the language of regulation to make bigotry sound reasonable. Alex stepped forward. He'd been quiet until now, but his voice was firm. We're leaving, Alex said. Both of us. Our parents didn't survive a war and cross an ocean so we could be treated like second-class citizens in the country we chose as our home. Roth and Michael Anthony stood with them. If Eddie and Alex don't play, neither do we, Roth said. We're a band. All four of us, or none of us. Burke's desperation was turning back to anger. You're all insane. You're throwing away $100,000. You're disappointing 20,000 fans. You're destroying your careers over hurt feelings. It's not about hurt feelings, Eddie said. It's about principle. It's about refusing to participate in a system that treats people as less than human based on where they were born. Eddie started walking toward the exit. His band followed. Burke called after them, his voice rising to a shout. You're done, Van Halen. You hear me? I'll blacklist you in every venue in Texas, in the entire South. You'll never work in this region again. I know every promoter from Houston to Atlanta. You're finished. But the destruction that followed shocked everyone in the music industry. Eddie stopped and turned around one last time. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost gentle, but every word cut deep. Mr. Burke, you're right about one thing. This moment will define careers, but not mine. People will forget about tonight's canceled show. They'll download our album anyway. They'll see us in other cities. But you? You'll be remembered as the man who was so blinded by prejudice that you destroyed a sold-out show rather than treat American citizens with basic respect. You'll be the punchline, the cautionary tale, the embodiment of everything that's wrong with the old guard in this industry. Eddie smiled sadly. And in 10 years, when America is more diverse, when immigrants are visible in every field, when the idea that you need to look a certain way to be American seems as absurd as it should, you'll be a relic, a dinosaur, a reminder of an uglier time that we've moved past. Eddie walked out. Behind him, 20,000 fans were about to have their evening ruined, and Clayton Burke was about to learn that hatred has consequences. By 6 in the Yamaitzita evening, word had spread through Houston. The show was canceled. The venue was in chaos. Fans demanded refunds. They demanded explanations. Burke tried to blame Van Halen, saying the band had broken their contract. But someone had overheard the confrontation. A stagehand who'd been unloading equipment. He'd heard everything. Burke's words about foreign performers. Eddie's calm response. The way Burke had singled out the Van Halen brothers while letting the others pass. The stagehand, a Vietnam veteran named Marcus Rodriguez, who knew something about being judged for your last name, told everyone who would listen. Within hours, the truth was spreading through Houston's music community. The next morning, newspapers picked up the story. But it wasn't just local papers. Rolling Stone got wind of it. Circus Magazine, Hit Parader. Rock journalists who'd been following Van Halen's meteoric rise suddenly had a story that was about more than just music. This was about identity, about immigration, about what it meant to be American in 1979. Some papers sided with Burke. Letters poured in from readers saying Eddie and Alex should have just shown their papers, but far more people were outraged. Young fans particularly, the generation that had grown up after the civil rights movement, couldn't understand how anyone could defend Burke's position. If Eddie Van Halen, who'd lived in America since he was 7, who'd contributed more to American music in 3 years than most people did in a lifetime, wasn't American enough, then who was? The controversy exploded. Radio stations took sides. Some banned Van Halen's music. Others played it more. Fans held protests outside the Summit Arena, not against Van Halen, but against Burke. Signs read, "No papers needed for rock and roll, and Eddie is more American than you." Burke tried to control the narrative. He held a press conference claiming he'd been misunderstood. But Rodriguez came forward publicly. He gave interviews. He recounted Burke's exact words. The damage was irreversible. Warner Brothers Records made a decision that changed the entire music industry forever. Warner Brothers, Van Halen's label, had been watching the controversy carefully. They'd seen the sales spike. Van Halen 2 had jumped 12 spots on the Billboard chart. Eruption was getting played on rock stations 20 times a day. Young fans were buying the album not despite the controversy, but because of it. Eddie Van Halen had become a symbol. The immigrant who'd stood up to bigotry. The artist who'd walked away from a fortune rather than compromise his dignity. Warner Brothers executives made a decision. They issued a statement supporting Van Halen's stance. Then they went further. They added a clause to every future touring contract. Any venue that wanted to book a Warner Brothers artist had to sign an anti-discrimination rider. No performer could be treated differently based on race, religion, national origin, or accent. Same treatment for everyone, or no show. It was revolutionary. Other labels started adopting similar policies. Within a year, the standard touring contract in rock music included anti-discrimination language. Eddie Van Halen had changed the industry. And Clayton Burke? His empire crumbled faster than anyone expected. Artists refused to play the Summit Arena. Major acts canceled upcoming shows. Within 6 months, Burke's venue was struggling financially. Sponsors pulled out. Advertisers fled. Within 2 years, the venue went bankrupt. Burke lost millions. Burke died in 1997, 18 years after that canceled concert, still insisting he'd been misunderstood, still blaming Eddie Van Halen for ruining his life. But Burke was wrong. Eddie Van Halen didn't destroy Clayton Burke. Clayton Burke destroyed himself. Van Halen went on to become one of the biggest bands in the world. The canceled Houston show became legendary. The band rescheduled for 6 months later in a different venue. 25,000 fans came. Eddie walked on stage and said just a few words. "Thank you for waiting. Thank you for understanding. Music doesn't care where you're from, and neither should we." The legacy of that night continues. Wolfgang Van Halen carries it forward, playing his father's guitar lines, honoring not just a musical legacy, but a moral one. The legacy of Edward Lodewijk Van Halen, the immigrant kid who showed the world that being American isn't about where you're born. It's about what you stand for and what you refuse to stand for.